Indeed, how great is our God. And even at this time, we need to continue singing, how great is our God. How great is our God. We're going to continue, and we're going to be talking about finding the right mate. Finding the right mate. I'm sure that there are many people who wished that to them they had found the right mate, because they don't believe that they found the right mate. One of the frustrations of young people fresh out of college, when they're looking for jobs, is that most employers are often looking for a person with 3 years of experience working in a similar position. And I remember when my daughter finished her university degree, and she was looking for a job in human resource. And for 1 year, she kept getting regrets. Because each position said they wanted somebody with experience. But how do you have experience when you've never worked? So it is a paradox that we want somebody with experience, but as people that are coming have never worked. It is therefore easier to get a job if you are already employed. But when looking for a mate, no one will look for a person with 3 years experience working in a similar position. No. And indeed, marriage is one of the few institutions that we get into without a day's experience. Without a day's experience. And that is why there has to be seed. Then there has to be the time before we see a harvest. Because it's an institution we've never been in before. It's something we've never done before. And therefore, the patience is one of the greatest things that is needed during that time before the harvest. Finding the right partner and getting married is one of the most important decisions that a person will ever make in their lives. So, looking for that tall, dark, handsome man, or looking for the man, the quiet, submissive wife, should not be the standard for looking for a mate. Should not be the standard for looking for a mate. And I remember counseling a Christian young lady who was desperate to get married. And at the age of 33, she felt that she was very old and that she needed to get married. So she came to see me. We had coffee together. And she came with a list of 11 things that she was looking for in a husband. And she started telling me that there is this man that she has met, and he fits the 10 points. So I said, okay. And she said, but all that's remaining is the 11th point. And I asked her, what was your 11th point? She said, the 11th point is that he should want to marry me. And so, here she is with her 10 points, but the 11th one, unfortunately, is not working. Okay, was not working. So I counseled her about letting God be the one to choose the right mate for her at the right time. It's a sad story because unfortunately God's right time was taking too long for her. So I eventually learned that she decided to marry someone who was not a believer, although she herself was born again. Now I want us to look at the Bible, because many times it's the Bible that will teach us how God wants a marriage to be, because we agreed at the beginning that marriage was God's idea. It was not our idea. And God has a manual for how marriage should work, and that manual is the Bible. And so let us look at two cases here. How did God go about getting a wife for Adam? What stands out in God's method was that he made sure that there was no interference from Adam. You don't want Adam around. You don't want him near. You don't want him eavesdropping. So what did he do? He put him to sleep. Adam had nothing to do with who his wife was going to be. It was purely God's choice, purely God's decision. And why did God make Eve out of Adam's rib? Why couldn't he have made Eve out of Adam's elbow? Or out of his knees? Okay? I will read for you from the book, something that is quoted here. It says, one person has said that God made the woman out of Adam's rib because that was close to his heart and under his arm, so that he could love and protect her. He did not take a bone from his foot so that he could step on her, or from his head so that she competes for leadership in the home, but from his rib. It is only God who can make the kind of spouse that is suitable for a man or from a woman. Now I'll give you a small testimony on how I knew that my husband was my husband, supposed to be my husband. I must confess that I did have that list when I was in college, and it didn't work. It didn't work. Because unfortunately, number 11 is always the other person's part, isn't it? It is. It is. But I remember when my husband and I started dating, we had dated for maybe 3 months. We had not talked of marriage. And I remember just saying no. If there was anything that petrified me, if anything that made me totally scared, was that I could end up marrying the wrong person. Because I had been taught by different people, it had been drummed into me that it is possible to marry the wrong person. And I was not a young believer. I had been discipled as a mature believer. By that time, I had been a Christian for over 20 years. And so I said, God, you have to give me a sign, or you have to talk to me. You have to let me know. And you have to let me know without, short of a writing on a wall. I want to know whether this is a man that I should marry. And so I remember sitting in my room that night, and I, sat down. I told God, God, the sun will come down today, and I will wait for you. I will not sleep until you give me a verse that will show me that I'm on the right track and that this is a man that you have chosen for me. And I sat there ready to sit there all night. And I didn't have to sit there all night. 5 minutes later, just 5 minutes later, the Lord gave me a verse. And that verse was so specific. Because the day before, the lady that I was living with, who was discipling me, had just asked me, how do you know that this is a man that you should marry? Tell us, and in any case, who advised you? Because to her, she believed that it should be a big council and who should advise you, and somebody must have told you, and there has to be agreement. So she was very, very, I can call it harsh with me the night before. And she really was asking me, who is it that has told you that he is the one? And so from a verse in Isaiah, the Lord told me, who is it that asked you whether this is so? Is it not I, the Lord? It is I. That's all I needed from God. In 5 minutes. The interesting thing is that that same night, my husband, then my boyfriend, fiance, because we really did want to get married, he was also praying and asking the Lord to give him a verse to prove to him that I am the woman that he should marry. It doesn't work like this for everybody, but this is how it worked for us. And so the next day we met, and he shared first, and he told me, well, those days he called me babe. Where that name went, I don't know. But he said, babe, yesterday I was praying, and I asked the Lord. It's funny, so it's okay, we can laugh. We can laugh. We can laugh. And I know my husband could be watching this, but really you have to tell me when I come back home where the name babe went. Okay? He says, babe, I was praying yesterday, and the Lord gave me a verse, and I want to share that verse with you. And the verse is from Revelation. I've always been told it's not Revelations with an S, it's Revelation. And he read for me a verse from Revelation that said, behold, I've opened a door before you that no man can shut. And you know how women are, oh dear, even me, I'm going to lose you, but I want to, please just stop with me, I want to talk. So anyway, I shared with him my verse as well, that the Lord had given me the night before, and it wasn't a coincidence. That was God's leading. God is faithful. And when he knows that we genuinely are asking him to tell us if this is the person that he wants us to marry, he will always let us know. He will always let us know. But many times, let me tell you why people do not ask God. Because we have a suspicion that he might say no. We have a suspicion that he might say no. Because already we are not confident in ourselves. And we are thinking, if I involve God, singlehood for the rest of my life. God is faithful. God is faithful. And let us trust him. Now, the next one that I want us to think of, a wife for Isaac. We've seen what God did. What God did to get a wife for Adam. Let us see what God did to get a wife for Isaac. To get a wife for Isaac, God recruited 2 people and angels. Abraham and his servant, and the angels that you're going to hear me talk about when I read the verse that I'm going to read. God started off by putting a desire in Abraham to get a wife for his son. This was a very interesting situation. Sarah had died, and Isaac was very affected. How do I know that? Because the day that his wife was brought to him, we are told, and then Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. And so I know that Isaac was affected by his mother's death. And because of that, he could not be bothered about marriage. He was now 40 years old. And Abraham was looking at him, and Isaac is not talking about marriage at all. At all. But Abraham had a fear. It was a godly fear. They were living amongst the Canaanites who worshipped other gods. And Abraham feared that Isaac might take a wife from the Canaanites. And God had told them not to intermarry with the Canaanites, because he told them, if you intermarry with the Canaanites, they will cause you to worship other gods. So what does Abraham do? Abraham calls his servant, his trusted servant. And that servant that day, I just do not know what he thought. Because that was a culture where there was a lot of respect. And Abraham tells this man, can you put your hand under my thigh? Can you put your hand under my thigh? And many times I've asked myself, what would I do if that was me? And this man thought, Abraham has lost it. The way I respect you. Then Abraham goes on, and we read in Genesis 24, verses 3 to 4. And Abraham says, I want you to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I am living, but that you will go back to my country and to my relatives and get a wife for my son Isaac. Because he knew that if Isaac got a wife from amongst his relatives, he would get somebody who fears Jehovah God. So I'll talk to Christian parents here. How concerned are you that your children marry someone who is a believer in Jesus Christ? How concerned are you? We see how concerned Abraham was. And how often do you pray that your son or your daughter will allow God to lead them to his own choice, a believer in him? Paul emphasizes this principle for us in 2 Corinthians, and I'm going to read it for us, chapter 6 and verses 14 to 16. And it says, "Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? What harmony is there between Christ and Belial? And what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever? What agreement is there between the temple of God and idols?" How involved are parents today in the task of finding a mate for their children? And some of you probably are again rolling your eyes and saying, be real, we're in the 21st century. Who in their right mind in the 21st century, okay, will allow their father or their mother to choose a mate for them? And that's a very valid comment, valid question. But the interesting thing is that Isaac was not aware that his father was in the process of looking for a wife for him. He was not aware. Abraham made this an issue between him and God. An issue between him and God. Prayer is the most powerful weapon that a Christian parent can use in finding a mate for their child. You don't have to involve them. Prayer is the most powerful weapon that a Christian parent can use in finding a mate for their child. And indeed, there's a young Christian lady who told me she's engaged right now, and she told me she's just discovered that this young man that she has known from when she was very young, from when they grew up together, but they were never really interested in one another. But now they're engaged, and she has just found out that the two mothers were very good friends, and they had been praying that these two will get married. And here we are. For those of us who think, oh, how do I get involved? Through prayer. Through prayer. So listen once again, back to Abraham. Let's listen to what he told his servant. This is what Abraham told the shocked servant. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and spoke to me, and promised me on oath, saying, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send his angels." Now he's talking to the servant. This God I'm talking to you about. "He will send his angels before you so that you can get a wife for my son from there, the land of Nahor." Nahor was his brother, okay? His uncle, because his father was Haran and Nahor was the brother, okay? So he says, "An angel will go before you as you go to get a wife for my son." So God engaged Abraham, he engaged Isaac, and he engaged angels. So Abraham made the looking of a wife for Isaac a very spiritual task. And indeed, it is a spiritual task. Where I come from, when parents were involved, all they would ask about different people is, just make sure you don't get married to a place where there are witches, where there are witch doctors. And indeed, whenever anybody brought somebody home to introduce them to the parents, the first question would be, which family do they come from? Then the parents would tell the young person, I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you means they're going to go back and find out whether there is any witchcraft in that family. Okay? But Abraham made the looking of a wife for Isaac a very spiritual task. Remember we said that only God can see the heart. Only God can see the heart. How many married couples have realized after marriage that the outward acts of love and kindness only hid a bitter, angry, violent, and selfish heart? They were outward acts of love, outward acts of kindness, but those acts of that we saw only hid a very dark heart on the inside that only God could see. That if we had involved God, God would have told us, my child, don't go in that direction. So here's Abraham's servant. He leaves for the town of Nahor with the assurance in his heart that Abraham's God was going to guide him. And indeed, the Bible says in Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 24, a man's steps are directed by the Lord. And so I'll go back to the book and we'll follow the story now from the book. Abraham's servant did not depend only on prayer, the prayer that his master prayed. And neither did he trust in his own abilities to choose. Out of all the girls that he'll probably meet, he wanted to be absolutely sure that the girl he got for Isaac was the exact one that God had chosen. And so he again fell back on the God of his master to guide him. And let's hear what now the servant is telling God. Because the servant realizes, let me see if I can also talk to my master's God. So he prays to his master's God and says, "O Lord God of my master Abraham, give me success today and show kindness to my master Abraham." And then he goes and he stands by a spring. And he says to God, "See, I'm standing beside this spring, and the daughters of the townspeople are coming out to draw water. May it be that when I say to a girl, 'Please let down your jar that I may have a drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I will water your camels too,' let her be the one you have chosen for my servant Isaac. Let it be something supernatural. Let it be so supernatural that I'll have no doubt that this is who you have chosen for my master, for Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." How does God show kindness to parents? God shows kindness to parents by giving their children the right person. By giving their children the right person. They're showing kindness to us. So, did God work with the servant, or did the servant work with God to fulfill this purpose? I want us to know that there was a purpose that Isaac needed to fulfill. Isaac was the offspring through whom Israel was going to be born. And so God had a purpose with Isaac. And this purpose, God could not leave it to Abraham and to his servant. God himself was the one in charge. God himself was the one who was working. So they were working with God's purpose. And many times a lot of people do not realize that in God bringing two people together, there is a higher purpose that he has for that marriage. And there was a higher purpose that God had for this marriage, other than just that Isaac should not marry a Canaanite. But if Isaac had married a Canaanite, he would have diluted the seed that God needed to bring the Israelite people into the promised land. Okay? We are told that Rebecca comes running, and she comes, and we're told she was a fine lassie, the way the British would say, a fine lass. And Rebecca offered him a drink, and then Rebecca said, exactly what he asked God that the person should say. And I will also water your camels. Now, if that was me, it would be a wrap. Can we just go right now to your parents and you pack your things and we go? But listen to what Genesis 24:21 says. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. What did he do? He realized that there was another criterion that he needed to find out, because number one, he has asked God that she should water the camels, but he also realized that the family she came from was supposed to be the relatives of Abraham. So what does he ask Rebecca? Genesis 24, verses 23 and 24. Whose daughter are you? And she answered, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son that Milcah bore to Nahor. Then the man bowed down and worshipped the Lord. Whenever the purposes of God are fulfilled in bringing two people together, the result is worship of God. We are told that he bowed down and he worshipped the Lord, saying, Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness. You remember the word kindness again? And faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives. And so up to this point, it may seem like, but what about Rebecca? Does God ever give us a choice? Does God give the woman a choice in who she's going to marry? So up to this point, it may seem like Rebecca had absolutely no say whether she should be Isaac's wife or not. Yet we must remember that God respects the free will of every individual. Even when God has chosen a mate for somebody, he will never force that individual to marry the person. And that is very, very scary. Because we always imagine, oh, if it is of the Lord, I'll just sit here and automatically the person will come to me. No. Once the Lord has shown us that this is a person through whom you will accomplish the purpose that I want for your marriage, we still have to make a choice. And this is why some people have actually ended up not marrying the person that God had chosen for them. Because they said no, simply. Why? Maybe they looked at the appearance. Maybe they looked at the height and said no. They've trusted in their own understanding instead of seeking God's will on the matter. But just remember that Abraham had already thought about this possibility. So as soon as he was confronted with the task of finding a wife for Isaac, let's listen to what the servant asked Isaac before he left. This is just Genesis 24 and verse 5. What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? Something that was discussed. The privilege of saying yes or no to a marriage proposal should be the right of every woman. And God makes it the right of every woman to say yes or no to a marriage proposal. But unfortunately, in some cultures, marriages are arranged and the women have to comply with the wishes of the parents, whether they like it or not. But Rebecca had a choice. And Abraham also respected the wishes of his prospective daughter-in-law. He was aware that even if the girl was the one God had chosen, she had the right to accept or reject the proposal. So let us listen to his response. And I will read the servant's question again. What if the woman is unwilling to come back with me to this land? This is Abraham's response. If the woman is unwilling to come back with you, then you will be released from this oath of mine. Wow. Wow. If the woman is unwilling, although it is God's choice, but she's unwilling, do not force her. Do not force her. So when Abraham's servant asked to leave immediately with the girl, so if you read the story, you'll find out that Abraham comes back home with Rebecca, and they're so excited. They're asking, oh my goodness, so you know Abraham, you work for Abraham. How is he doing? These are our relatives. So they brought he comes in, and the servant wants to leave immediately with Rebecca. But the relatives, where relatives also come in, because there are people who also say, I will get married. My relatives have got no say in this. It is me. I have decided whether they like it or not. In fact, they don't have to come to the wedding. If you just make the wedding cheap.